want to share this fourth one with you. It's much shorter than the others, but I think it's very important. And that is, often we doom our decisions by skipping the stakeholder's voice in decisions, skipping the stakeholder in the process. That's kind of an odd word, perhaps. What do we mean by stakeholder? Good. Vested interest, something to gain or lose. In fact, the term actually comes from long ago in horse racing, believe it or not, that you had a stake in this horse's running. Whether it was going to do well or not, you had an interest in whether it succeeded or not, literally a monetary stake in this. How else would you describe a stakeholder? Maybe I should make it more specifically. If a specific question, if you were thinking of a stakeholder in a decision that you're making, who would you be thinking of specifically? I don't mean a person's name, but how would you characterize whether they're a stakeholder or not? Yeah, they might have financial interest in that. What else? How about, sometimes it's even said this generally, is if they're affected by the decision. How about this one? What if they are involved in carrying out the decision? Right? As oddly enough, those stakeholders are the ones that we often leave out. We're so busy thinking about our quote-unquote customer or the person that we're serving that we don't think of the people that are between the decision makers and those that are served. All these people that have to carry it out, they may be the most important stakeholders, right? In fact, sometimes when we talk about stakeholders, they talk about managing them differently. This has a lot to do with communication, but let me just give you this as a frame of thought. Sometimes they talk about stakeholders as being characterized by two variables. They have power and they have interest. And so you can think of these in several quadrants here. You've got those that are in this upper quadrant. They have a lot of power, but not a vested interest in this, and you just want to keep them satisfied. Because they're not really concerned about any of the details or anything else. They just need to be satisfied enough that they're going to continue to support it, right? What about those that have low interest and low power? Those are sort of the outsiders. It's hard to think of them as very engaged. So you just want to sort of monitor those people in terms of how much information you give. But now these are a couple of the most important quadrants here. What about those that have a lot of power and a lot of interest? Those folks, you want to make sure that you manage them very closely. You're going to spend a lot of time and attention on those particular stakeholders. But this is the quadrant I want to draw your attention to. These are the often forgotten, and at least in my experience in the meetings I have here, and actually in other organizations too, these are the stakeholders that we frequently neglect. Those are those with a great deal of interest, but not necessarily a lot of power. And these you want to keep informed. They don't always have to be involved in every decision, but they need to know what's going on in all these decisions because they're affected by it or they're having to carry it out, and they need to know what's happening. So when we include the stakeholder's voice in the decisions, not only do we get better decisions, because hopefully we get better insight, but we get better engagement and commitment to following through. There's a Japanese term that I've shared with you before. In process improvement, it's called the Gemba. The Gemba, it's G-E-M-B-A. The Gemba means the place where it happens in Japanese. In fact, it's funny, in other contexts it can also mean the scene of the crime. Okay? But this is the location where it's all going on, and the Gemba is the place where you want to go if you want to fully understand something. Now the reason for this is because this language was first used in process improvement in large plants, industrial situations like a car plant. And when the CEO, way over there in a building in their glass office on the top floor, is making a decision, they are too far from the Gemba to be making a wise decision. So they would take a Gemba walk, which is literally to leave the office, and the decision makers would come down on the floor of the plant and stand around that spot thinking, okay, this is what we have to solve, so they could fully understand all the variables and the experience of those that are involved in this and what might be affected. You get that? So the closer we get to the Gemba, the better decisions we make. Now, we can't always go to the Gemba, but we can engage the stakeholders who are already there. Right? If we're going to be making decisions, we always want to make sure that we've included the voice of the stakeholders. Now, in my experience, we don't pause to ask who are the stakeholders and do we know anything about what they think? We make an assumption that because we've been in their position previously, or because we know a lot, or because we have wisdom, or because we know where we're headed, that we can make the decision just as well without involving the stakeholders and getting their voice. But let me suggest, if you want to make sure that you don't doom your decisions, you need the stakeholder's voice. So you have to stop and think, first of all, who is the stakeholder? I've given you a worksheet in your materials that we won't use for the sake of time here, but pause and think, who are the stakeholders in this process? And think broadly, make sure that you have them all down, and then challenge yourself by, how can I get their voice involved in this? You know, maybe the best way is to invite them to the decision-making moment. Include them in the meeting, include them in the conversation. Where that's not possible, perhaps you could have meetings previously and ask their opinions. We've done this in some of our strategic planning, where we led appreciative inquiry interactions and focus groups to ask stakeholders, give us your opinion, and we'll take it back to the decision-making process. It may be the sort of situation where you can do surveys, or you can collect data and do assessment so that you can use that in your decision-making. But if the stakeholder's voice is absent in the decision-making moment, it's unlikely that this is going to be a good decision. Now, that has to do with making a good decision. Remember, the second thing I said that you get when you engage the stakeholder's voice is not just the insight and the better decision, but the better engagement. Let me just suggest that stakeholders, they need to be very informed, and if they're informed, they don't even necessarily have to agree with every decision, because if they feel like they are involved in the things that can affect them, they will be much happier and engaged in carrying them out. How many of you have been in a situation before where someone's made a decision and you think, well, if they just asked me, I could have told them this was going to be a problem, or this is going to affect me, I wish I had a chance to say something about it or suggest something about it. It's not that you wanted to get your way, it's that you wanted to feel like you had a part in the thing in which you had skin in the game, right? Let me suggest, and I'm giving it short shrift for the sake of time, but that if you really want to make sure that you're making good decisions, you need to make sure that you've included the voice of the stakeholder. And that means that you need to pause and think, who are the stakeholders in this? Might I suggest to you that this is not as efficient in some ways? You'll feel like you can move faster without doing this. Many people will feel, me included, sometimes I think, I already know, I can just make this decision, it'll be faster. But let me suggest that when it comes to making great decisions, the kind of decisions that you don't have to go back and remake, moving fast is not as big a priority as you think. And engaging stakeholders is far more important.